Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the School Brief. Today, we're talking about learning beyond the classroom. This is a phrase that many schools use, but it can mean many different things depending on the school. For some schools, it might mean outdoor education, or residential trips, or expeditions, or maybe service learning. There's a lot of different types of learning beyond the classroom. So, we're going to kind of define that today, but we're also going to cover what makes a good outdoor learning or beyond the classroom program, and then we're going to help you decide what type of program can work well for your child. We're joined by three educators today that are from all over Asia, but have experience in all over the world. So I'd like to turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves. Um, Chris, can I start with you?
Sure. Happy. Happy to. My name's Christopher Coates. I'm the school director at American School Hong Kong. We're a U.S. Common Core curriculum school plus the IB diploma. I have been in the Hong Kong, Macau area since 2002, so almost 24 years now, working at 4 different international schools. And all of those schools have had very substantial outdoor education and beyond the classroom learning program. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. David, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is David Morris. I'm a secondary enrichment leader at the Alice Smith School in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's my 13th year at the school, and I've been in this leadership position for 8. So I've got quite a lot of experience in delivering our enrichment program, which will kind of encompass what I understand to mean by sort of outdoor education and education beyond the classroom. So really looking forward to getting into the chat.
Thank you so much. And Gio, would you mind introducing yourself and a little bit about your background?
Of course. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Bernard Geoxavier. I'm currently the associate head of secondary here at Tsinghua International School in Beijing. But I've had an opportunity to work in education both in the United States and in China for almost 2 decades now, starting as a classroom teacher, but then really cutting my teeth in being a dean of students and helping craft, the various schools that I've been at all the way in administration through now to help incorporate these opportunities that really bring to life our core values. And like the other speakers have mentioned, taking that beyond the classroom, going for that depth is such a key thing that we all work towards. So I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is a topic that is very near and dear to me as well. I used to be a service learning teacher myself, so I am really excited to hear about your experience and really help parents understand this massively important and part of schools. So let's start the conversation by defining what it is. So, what do we mean by learning beyond the classroom? To define the topic clearly, schools often talk about, learning beyond the classroom. It might mean outdoor education. It might mean enrichment, service learning. Um, so to start with this question, like, what is learning beyond the classroom? And what should parents understand that to mean? So, Chris, could I start with you on this question?
Sure. No worries. I think learning happens everywhere in life, and I believe that sometimes we have maybe a too traditional view of education, that education can only happen within the 4 walls of a classroom. That certainly was the way I was brought up, but so much more meaningful learning takes place outside the classroom. I think it's meaningful when it's connected to what's happening in the classroom, but it doesn't always need to be connected to what's actually taking place in the curriculum because it's all life experience. In fact, preferably, kids will be doing new things, having new experiences that they've never done before. They can't do in a school environment, or they've never done those things with their families before. So at every school I've been at, we've always tried to create a wide variety of experiences that the kids can't get in the classroom itself. And they grow from that. And they grow from the independence of being away from their peers. They grow by spending time with their peers outside of the school environment. They grow from new experiences that they've never had before. They're transformative experiences, and I think the other speakers will likely expand on this. When you get kids out of their comfort zone, they grow and they develop and they mature. And if I'm a parent with a child in an international school, I would not put that child in a school if they did not have an experiential learning program for them.
Wow, that's really good. I especially like the part there about getting students outside of their comfort zone. I wonder, David, could you tie on a little bit there about what it actually means, like getting students out of their comfort zone?
Yeah, of course. I, I mean, I agree with everything Chris said. I think the idea of learning beyond the classroom, it can't just be simply fixed as getting outside the four walls. It's more about getting outside of the context of a fixed curriculum, and providing those developmental opportunities for students to grow and for them to thrive. And a big part of that is trying new things they wouldn't do otherwise. So pushing them outside their comfort zone, for uh, a student who's fairly experienced in getting out, out and about in nature on a weekend, perhaps with a family, going that one step further and taking on the Duke of Edinburgh challenge and doing the expedition across 2 or 3 nights is pushing them outside their comfort zone. Yet I know that we also have children that don't really go outside of their condo, on a weekend, or they might just stay in into the local residence area pool, and that's about it. So for them, just leaving the city and going and having a day trip to a farm or engaging in some sport outside of school, a cultural experience, a cooking class, something like that, something they wouldn't think of doing because in their own kind of lifestyle, they just don't have those opportunities otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that's really good. Gio, you wanted to chime in there?
yeah, no, and I think that to take it one step further, there's so many times when we talk about something theoretical, and it's great for schools to really intentionally make it practical. There's so many times when we talk about core values, our mission statements, what's important to each one of our schools. And when we talk about aspects, for example, such as character or integrity or leadership, or even when we think about students wanting to take ownership over their own education, when's that moment of self excavation? It means so much for different kids, and a place that puts community first and really wants to not just have students regurgitate information that you've taught them, builds in intentionality around this opportunity for students to step up. And it's not easy, right? And I think that to glean everything that David and Christopher were saying is we do want students to experience that healthy challenge, that healthy struggle. And maybe it brings a couple of tears, or maybe it's some really taxing days that they have to push themselves. And at the end of that experience, they're able to come back to the classroom and you see real growth. And that's why, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it later, these are milestones for students in their education, right? It's not just a one-off, it's not just a check the box. And that's just really important thinking about good quality institutions.
Nice. Yeah. So I think that really helps us understand, what it is. But David, I remember you mentioned something in when we talked last time. You made an important point about like the way we use words like enrichment and
Mm.
extracurriculars and outdoor learning, experiential learning, service learning. So for parents listening today, should they understand these as separate things, or is it kind of like all one thing or part of a bigger thing? Um,
I think that schools can use different sort of key buzzwords to define all of the uh, learning and development that goes on outside of a traditional curriculum. So we call it enrichment at Alice Smith, and under that sort of banner comes the service learning, the extracurricular activities, the house system, the trips. So that all comes under enrichment. Because in our view, in our kind of language at Alice Smith, we find it enriches their experience and helps them to grow and to thrive. But on a personal level, I don't think it really matters what the school calls it. I think that what is going to really advance that child is if they buy in and the family buys in to what the school are offering, both in their, as Gio mentioned, the kind of intentionality, their purpose, as well as the kind of programs of learning beyond the classroom that are on offer. And that parents should go into schools and actually specifically ask those questions. What does your extracurricular program look like? What sort of trips do you run? What service or community-based opportunities are there? What do you have that my child could choose to develop in that might be new or unfamiliar or a challenge for them?
So focusing more on the outcome rather than the buzzwords or the language. And I remember, Chris, you mentioned this too in our last conversation, that when you're doing these school tours and when you're talking to parents, you lay out exactly what you offer at the school. So, I mean, in your opinion, like, do these buzzwords fit into it, or is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, when I do speak to prospective parents, I do so knowing that they might not be just looking at our school, they're looking at other schools, and that's absolutely fine. And I think the paradigm or the lens that they should look through when they're looking at schools is not what's the best school, but what is the best school for my kid. Every child is different, and it's finding the right fit. And so I make it very clear to our parents that holistic education, holistic development of children is a big part of who we are. So academics are certainly important, but so are all the other things like character development, being physical, socially, emotionally developed and healthy. And that they need to know that if their child is going to come to our school. And that our outdoor education, our Week Without Walls program is part of who we are. And so if their child is going to come to our school, they know what we stand for, what we believe in, and hopefully they're in alignment with what our values are, and that they believe their child is a good fit for that. So, and that's sometimes a challenge too, because sometimes we have to really sell parents and students on the value of these programs. Sometimes maybe the child is reluctant to get out of his or her comfort zone and needs a bit of a push from us to do so. But the parents need to be on board with us doing that so that the child will benefit from these experiences. So again, I think we need to be very transparent about who we are as a school so parents know exactly what they're getting if their child comes here, and they know exactly what the expectations are for the child and for the parents as well too.
Awesome. Gio, you wanted to add there?
No, I was going to say expand, and I've Chris, I've been in the exact same spot, and I've lived that experience. You're absolutely right. And at the same time, I've also had parents who are very excited about our school because they love these programs and they want to do it. They want to spend a week
Yeah.
without walls and travel. And depending on the age of the student, I think it's also important to make sure that that kid has a seat at the table during the process. Because if you have a student who isn't necessarily bought into, but the family is very mission aligned, it can also be a tough transition for that child. And so making sure that it's something that the kids bought onto and the kids excited about as much as the family is really critical because, I would love to go back to college and have all the experiences and take advantage of everything that's out there, but it is really the student's journey that we're trying to focus on.
Awesome. Well, I think we can tell just from our conversation so far that there are lots of different varieties, and schools' values differ and make the outdoor education program or the experiential learning program slightly different from school to school. So I think it's really important, and something parents can take home with them is to ask the right questions. And I think that leads us perfectly into the next section of the talk, which is kind of understanding what meaningful provision looks like in practice. And maybe we can like all share some examples of what meaningful provision looks like, what you've seen, and kind of go into a bit deeper into what it is. So, David, could I start with you on this one? Is there some practical guidance that you could maybe give to parents, and maybe an example of learning beyond the classroom that shows what meaningful provision looks like?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I'm sure Gio and Chris have got loads and loads of examples themselves. One that stands out to me is actually not necessarily the kind of the most glamorous trip or anything like that. It's actually a extracurricular activity that's aligned with the UNHCR here in Malaysia, and it's a student-led activity. So whilst it's coordinated by staff members, and obviously for safeguarding purposes, we have staff supervision, the students are broken up into two teams. One team is planning a lesson for refugee children, whilst the other team is delivering the lesson they planned the previous week, and they just rotate around. And each week we bring in anywhere between 20 and 40 refugees from a local education center. And it's real reciprocal learning, because one of the things you've got to watch out for with anything service based is that it's tokenistic and, at worst, potentially, whether intentionally or unintentionally, gives off the kind of savior vibe, the rich savior vibe, which we try and avoid. So everything's got to be reciprocal. And it's very much, our narrative is very much that by the refugee students coming in, they get to use our facilities and have access to kind of resources and spaces and learning tools that they wouldn't otherwise in a charity funded education. Whereas our students develop the leadership, the discipline, the community and communication skills, and the organizations. It's really hard work for them. They can't be late. They've got to be on time. And it really teaches them some amazing life skills that they can transfer through on into businesses and career later on in life. And I think it's a testament to the student experience in that program that it's continued to grow. And now at 2 points in a year, they actually offer weekend events for those same children, so they can hit more of them, where they offer a fun day and then a sports day, things that they won't get at their education center. And that came completely off their ideas, off their passion, and off the learning that came from engaging with this program across the year in their extracurricular studies. So going back to what Gio said about them having a seat at the table, actually really led that improvement in our own provision as well. That wouldn't have happened without them. So I think for me that really stands out as when meaningful provision can have an impact.
That is so beautiful. Yeah, that is what it's all about. And I think that's one reason why this is such an exciting topic, because you don't get that in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
I would love to hear some more examples of from Chris or Gio, if you want to chime in.
Sure, I'll go. Many examples, but one that really jumps out to mind that I think is most memorable is a program where we ran. David, you mentioned that, is it the savior phenomenon, where you go in on a community service trip into a developing country, and we're there for a week and we do good work, and then we leave. This one program really stood out because we we took a group of kids to Myanmar, and we were in a rural village, and we had a wonderful experience. But this program, one of the expectations was that the kids and the teachers who were involved would go each year. When we did our experience week program, we would take those same kids and same teachers back every year. And we built a relationship with that community and that school. And it didn't just stop with the week that we spent in that community, it continued year round. And our kids were constantly doing activities, either fundraising or online activities with the students in that school. And it eventually culminated with us raising enough money to bring enough of those kids here to Hong Kong and actually visit the school in Hong Kong. So it was a sustainable relationship that developed, but the kids had to commit to that and the teachers had to commit to it. And they did work year round to connect and support those students in that community. And it was wonderful. And each year we would go back and we were building a new classroom or a new home for a family. And we'd come back the next year and see how that family was progressing. Probably the most rewarding experience I experienced personally. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, this is what it's all about. Love
Yeah.
it. Gio?
And yeah, no, 100%. And so one of the things, to loop back to your very first question, what should families think about when they're looking at schools? I could mirror the exact same experiences. My current school does an amazing partnership with a rural school and a rural village. So it's all about building those multi-year relationships and building that continuity. And I think it speaks to a quality institution doesn't just do lip service, the idea of a trip or an experience. You're not buying a tourist experience for a couple of days and you come back and add it to your list and your resume and say, I've gone there and I've done that. You really want students to come out of this with an appreciation and a growth on an interpersonal level. And so my example is a little bit different, but it speaks to, this was a couple of schools ago, where the mission statement spoke to developing people the world needs. And one of our big pushes at that time was to grow empathy. And you don't have to necessarily do that to be a superhero around the world or change whole communities, but it can start with the person next to you. So my example for you was the 9th grade trip we did. We take the entire 9th grade out to the Wasatch Front National Forest, no technology, science and art focused. And you put the students in charge, very much from what you heard from David and Christopher, in terms of, if we're going to cook breakfast, someone's going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and get that ready. We're going to have our supplies. Someone's going to get all that ready. Someone's going to have all the hiking gear. Someone's going to recon the route. And you put students in charge. And if we fail, right, if we don't have breakfast ready at 6 o'clock and that has a knock-on effect, students have to own that. They grow that responsibility. They grow that maturity through experience. And there was a night hike, the second night that we had. And we had a member of the community who had cochlear implants. And so they had an implant with their ears and it would aid for them to hear. The entire experience was to get out in the middle of nature, for it to be completely silent, and you soak up the sounds of birds, the animals, the wind through the trees, to soak that up. And here's a student for whom that experience was really difficult. And so what the students built was an opportunity to do a soundboard with that student, to go back and try to recreate for them the experience of being out in the nature and out in the forest that night. And for students to be out in that experience and realize there is something a classmate of theirs was missing, and how to bring them in, how to fill them in, how to make them feel included, isn't something that you can teach in a curriculum. It's not part of a lesson plan per se, right? We can talk about values, but it's for them to really experience and feel how they can help the person next to them in a different way that you want your child to come out with at the end of the day. So I think, going back to your original question, you want parents to make sure, like we've echoed all day, that their values are echoed in the schools they're going to. They see these institutions, these commitments which schools are making, as being reflective of what they really want for themselves and for their kids.
Nice. Yeah, that's super helpful, and it kind of paints a pretty clear picture of what intentional outdoor learning or beyond the classroom actually looks like. I think that's really helpful for parents. So often we think as a parent, I think learning beyond the classroom, it looks like fun, right? My kid gets to go on this great trip. But the main point or the main value add there is what is the outcome? What does my child get from this activity? And I think you've all highlighted that it's got to be a prolonged thing. It's not just a one trip and then done, and then they forget about everything. It's part of the school culture, right? So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. All right, so that brings us to, I think, the main question that many parents really want to know, and that is it the right fit for your child? This is perhaps what most of the parents are listening to the answer to this question. So, Chris, I'd like to start with you here. Could you speak with prospective families about what makes your program a good fit for their child?
Okay. Yeah, I think when parents look at any school, they need to look at really the values of the school, and those should be explicitly clear, whether it's on the school's website or when they do a school visit, when they talk to people, the people in the community, all stakeholders should know what the school values are. So everything we do should be in some way connected to those values if we're doing our jobs correctly. And for us as a school, these types of experiences are part of who we are. And, but I do think that we as a school need to be diverse and flexible enough that kids have options available to them within experiential learning. So typically we will run in our secondary school anyway, we will run local opportunities as well as overseas opportunities. All of our excursions and programs are somehow based on a combination of culture and service and activity as well too. And with some programs focusing more on one than the others, but there's usually, if not two, all three of those components in the program. Um, but I think Geo said earlier about the kids being part of that decision making, that, yeah, being part of our experiential learning is an expectation in the school, but there is choice there for kids in the type of programs that we offer for them. If the kids really want to get pushed, we have opportunities to do that. But if there's areas where kids might not be comfortable with that, that they will still step outside their comfort zones, but maybe in a way that's more acceptable to them, and they'll take those chances, but they're small steps as opposed to real big steps in that regard. So I think every good experiential program should have enough flexibility and variety for kids. So that's my 2 cents in that regard, that we do need to give them a healthy push, but they need to be part of that decision making as well.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that's really helpful to understand that even within a school, you'll see a spectrum of opportunities to engage and with learning beyond the classroom. David, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of what you're offering there?
Well, it was I'd like to speak more on Chris' point about making sure that the school that you're looking at has a range of opportunities that are suited to your child's needs. Because that child could be anywhere on a range of kind of confidence or skill level or whatever. But also, I think an understanding that the learning beyond the classroom, the learning that comes from learning beyond the classroom, is of growing import as we move forward into the future. And what we see a lot is still a lot of parents asking about the traditional curriculum. How many GCSEs do they get? How many A levels do they get? How many of your students go to Harvard? How many of your students go to Cambridge? And what we have to remind our parents is that that's a fantastic goal to have. A very academic child wants to push for those Ivy League universities and, go into top level academia. It's so competitive that they need something else to differentiate them. Because if they work their socks off, get a bunch of tuition, do all their homework, and they're very, naturally proficient in a subject, coupled with their hard work, and they get 4 A stars at A level, how are they going to be picked out of a pile of 300 other applicants, all with an identical piece of paper saying, I've got 4 A stars? And it's all of this experience that will allow that child on that application to show that they are reflective, that they're driven to self-improvement, that they're creative, and they have developed holistically in broad brush strokes to be a better citizen, rather than just narrowing in on that kind of old school traditional, I've got to get my 4 A stars or my distinctions or whatever it might be, to get into the top level university. And I think there's growing focus on this, but I guess a plea for parents to get on board with that and follow that train so it doesn't leave the station without you, and really impart the benefits that a good learning at beyond the classroom program can provide.
Yeah, that's really solid advice. In the age of AI and every student, being able to perform really well, we do need ways to differentiate ourselves. That's a really good point. Gio, would you like to add on there?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes we get that there's a false argument going out there that it's either or. And it's rather a strong curriculum, a strong school that has strong values and is able to push students to grow in a way that to challenge themselves in a way that they may not have thought of before. And I used to be an assistant principal at a high school in the US. And I think one of the things that always came up in that conversation is that what is our purpose? What is our intent with all of the curriculum we're doing, with all the classes they take, with all the tests they perform? What's its purpose? And if it's just to get into the school and just to get in those gates and say that I've achieved going to that college, what happens after 6 months? Where is that student a year or two down the road? Because getting to the post-secondary educational institution isn't itself the end of the road. It's the next step to which we want students to go, right? We want to continue to grow. We want them to foster a passion or a drive that propels them not just past, through our own educational program to where they're going to go to a great institution, but beyond. And if a parent's looking at necessarily only the test scores or only the hardest curriculum or only the percentage of where kids go into schools, and that student goes there and they go to that next college and they're not successful, we've been doing that child a disservice, right? Because we really, ultimately, we're all in this and we've all been advocating for these great programs because we know the long game, where these students are going to be the change makers that we're hoping them to be. And we know that it's through opening their eyes to see it is more than just looking at that book, more than just preparing for that assessment, and more than just achieving that grade at the end of the day.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think for as a parent myself, balancing those priorities of good grades and also making sure that they're well-rounded and they have lots of extracurriculars, and the balancing act is quite challenging. So for parents watching, I think there probably a lot of them have the same challenge and they struggle with this. So I'd like to put this question out to all three of you, actually. Anybody can answer this one. But what advice would you give to parents trying or struggling to balance those, good grades or, like what you just said, Gio, How do you balance that?
Well, maybe I can take a quick stab at it. And for me, I think the conversation is a little bit different depending on where the child is. I've had a lot of experience working with middle school students predominantly along a little bit of this path. And I feel that that's where sometimes a little bit of an arms race of prep work or leaning heavy into academics, when there is more an opportunity for a student to maybe spread their wings and push themselves beyond the classroom. Um, I think that if I was speaking to a parent who is looking at the balance between academics and whether it be extracurriculars, clubs, excursions, experiences, especially when they're younger, when we're in middle school, that's the perfect opportunity to wear a lot of different hats and see what they like and see what they don't like, because there is a little bit less of a pressure, or whether it's internal or external, to succeed, because at the end of the day, it's the ramifications of success or failure aren't necessarily as drastic, but they are good opportunities to grow and learn. I often say this to middle school parents, in that I want them to push themselves. I want them to maybe find that there wasn't that experience that really was great for them, because sometimes finding what isn't a good fit for them is as important as it is to find out something they really, really love, because it helps them kind of guide their azimuth to that place where they do want to spend their time, where they do want to lean in. And if we're not pushing and probing along that way, giving opportunities to taste a new food, to try a new sport, to go and give a little service to a different aspect of the community, they won't know what they are really going to spend the rest of their time with until they're really pushed to be in those opportunities. So I think for the end of the day, one of the things I would say is to push themselves to take that step, to try, to pick up a new experience and sign up for something that they may not have necessarily thought they were going to do when they started the year.
All right. Nice. Chris or David, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I really agree with Geo. Those middle years are critical. And I think good schools will have very broad and diverse middle years programs where we want them to experience all of the arts. We want them to experience sport and PE. They need to try different languages. They need to try different subjects within the different disciplines. And it's done at a time where they're not really under the pressure for grades at that time. Their grades in grades 6, 7, and 8 are not going to be on a transcript. It's not going to impact them when they apply to universities. And that's where I think my advice to parents is to take a step back and let the kid make some mistakes, let them fall down and pick themselves up and grow from it. And as Geo said too, it's just as important to learn what they're not passionate about, what they're not interested in, what they don't like, so they can really focus on the areas that they do like and they are passionate about. And that's going to really increase their chance for success. So it's just I guess the advice would be to give a little bit of slack and let the kids try different things. And it's not the end of the world when they make a mistake, because if you don't let them make mistakes, they're not going to learn and they're not going to grow. They have to let them fail.
Excellent point. Thank you. David, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Only to kind of reinforce what Gio and Chris have said, really. I think that in both extracurriculars and in traditional education, it's not necessarily that more is better. I think intentionality and purpose in decision making, making informed choices, is going to be key there. So your school offers your child the opportunity to do 10 or 11 GCSEs. Do they have to do that many? No. There's going to be no extra benefit if they do 8 or 12. If they're able to, then why not? But having that kind of awareness of self and your own child, and having that child be aware of their own sort of tolerance levels, it's really important to find that balance. and find that perfect kind of Goldilocks zone of extracurriculars, trips, experiences, plus allowing enough time for academic rigor in the key subjects and things that they really do want to focus in and progress, and will be used, throughout their lives, whatever their lifelong goals are. So it's not just more is better. Intentionality for me is key.
Yeah, I agree. Intentionality. And for parents watching this, Chris, you mentioned this in our last chat actually as well. But knowing that your family needs to fit the school just as much as the school needs to fit your family, right? So that is really an important thing. I think we all need to take into consideration and analyze what our family's values are, and then we can make a better decision on whether or not the school is going to be a good fit for us and whether we're going to be a good fit for the school, right? So just to wrap this up, if parents could remember just one thing from today's conversation, I'd like to see what it is that you would like them to remember. So if we could just all share that one thing that you'd like parents to remember from our chat today, that would be really awesome. Whoever's got that idea first can take the mic.
I'm just going to say it again. Make informed decisions, make intentional choices, and don't be afraid to push your boundaries and try new things. But find that balance between your academics and your experientials. That would be my key takeaway.
Excellent. Thank you.
I guess for me, I got attracted to a school in New York that gave a really good tagline, and that when you look at classrooms from 100, 200 years ago, they were in rows and in boxes because it very much mirrored the world they were going to go into. We were looking at a world that was highly industrialized. You were going to be going to work in a factory, and so school was meant to kind of prepare you for working in a factory and working in an economy that it was built for. I think today we're looking for students who are comfortable with ambiguity, who are ready to take a vague and uncertain environment and be able to ask the right questions and be ready to lead, to head in a direction, and to rally their classmates or their peers or their citizens with them in a direction they think is right. And so when we think about that self-advocacy skills, when we think about those soft skills, I think this is why a conversation on experiential learning is so, so important, and why I would advocate that this type of an angle at looking at an education for their kids is really, really important. And so I'd hope that parents continue to value that this is a really core aspect of their children's education.
Awesome. Thank you.
I guess my turn. I think holistic education is something I'm quite passionate about, my belief in that. And I think partially from a philosophical perspective, but you could also take a pragmatic approach. And I think David talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think well-rounded people are more interesting people. And I think they adjust better to the world that they're in, regardless, whatever those circumstances might be. I think well-rounded kids become more resilient kids and more adaptable because they bring a variety of things to the table. So that's kind of the philosophical approach. I guess the practical approach would be, if you are obsessed with getting into top universities, the grades won't do it alone. They need to bring something else to the table, because when top universities are trying to build a freshman class, they want a little bit of everything in that class. Of course, they're all going to be good students, but they want athletes, they want leaders, they want musicians and artists. They want a variety, like a cosmopolitan variety of kids who are going to make up that freshman class. And so what is it that your child does beyond being a great student that's going to make them somebody they want to join their freshman class? So If they just go to school every day and study and get 7s in the IB and get a perfect 45, it doesn't mean they're going to get in. It's something else is going to get them in. And so they need to develop holistically, not just academically.
Excellent. Well, I think that really summarizes the importance of this topic that we've been discussing today. And I hope that the parents watching have a clearer understanding of what it is, what learning beyond the classroom really is, and how important it really is. I think we've made that abundantly clear. So thank you to all of the speakers who joined us today. Thank you. And thank you, parents, for watching. I hope that it has been helpful for you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.